because reading the book of Ezra is so hard because of the time frame. And if you go from verse 6 to verse 7, there's 50 years. And so it gets a little confusing. And in reading this week, I was reading, there was basically 3 kings of Persia. And as you know, Artaxerxes, there's Artaxerxes 1, 2, and 3. Well, if you aren't careful, it gets kind of confusing to who is who. So this should help you a little bit. And I also put in there where the book of Esther fits in there. Esther was really only about a 10-year period. I mean, King Ahasuerus was longer than that, but the book of Esther really covers kind of 10 years, and it kind of sticks in the middle of that. So I'm hoping that helps you a little bit. Now, if you saved your thing from last week, otherwise I've got a new set of notes for those who didn't save their notes. Nobody needs those. Okay, good. Oh, okay. There's one. Well, last week, there's a notes. I printed them on both sides, so that if you have last week's notes, there's 2 at the top, and this is 3 at the top. So you didn't need. So if you save that, otherwise I've got another copy. Should be.
3 is the last.
Yep. 3 is on the back page of that, right? So this week, what's kind of new things? Oh, there's a Delta variant. Now there's a new Omicron variant. So Omicron, that sounds like something out of the Tron movie. So my guess is there's going to be, it's like the flu. There's going to be the H5N1, H1N1. I mean, there's just a whole family of them. So that's something to look forward to. I mean, continue to pray for Mikey Blair and the family. I guess he's doing better. He's up walking around, and they've got him off the ventilator, and he's got him off the drugs so they can actually talk to him, and that's a good thing. That's one of the kind of the, having kids is kind of it says they're a blessing from the Lord, but I have to tell you, there's some downsides to being a parent too. Mike and Wanda would trade places with Mikey in a heartbeat. Can't happen. And there's the physical things, but I think as parents, when they go through suffering, you go through. And the real tragedy is when you brought your kids up right, they turn their back on God. That's got to be a heartbreaking. You know what? The reality is that we're all individuals before God, in individual choices. So. I remember bringing our daughter home from the hospital and put her in the crib overnight, and I'm thinking, every article I ever read about SIDS came to mind. What would I do if I woke up and my daughter was just in the crib dead? Terrible. I mean, but that's the kind of stuff that happens. On the positive side, kids are kind of cool. I mean, they're a blessing. I guess the thing is I noticed with kids is when our daughter was born, I noticed, now there's a vulnerability that I have that I did not have before. I mean, everything I read about pedophiles and those kind of things, and I just, wow, I don't know. I think I'd probably spend some years in jail. But that's just, that's, I guess, the way it is. So we take the good and the bad, and we pray for them. So we're going to talk about chapter 4 in Ezra. And so I guess the first thing I'd like to go, basically, things were going so well. I mean, when we left off in chapter 3, they said they had laid the foundation, right? I mean, they're starting to rebuild the process, and they were overjoyed. I mean, the older people, they were talking people probably in their 60s who were young at the time of Solomon's temple, were weeping. They said, man, this is pretty pitiful. This is just this isn't much of a temple to our God. The young people were pretty excited because, wow, we didn't have a temple. We just read about it or heard about it. So a great time of joy, of course, just like anything else, whenever things are going well, it's always, and then but this happens or this happens. So let's go ahead and turn to 2 Corinthians, or 1 Corinthians, excuse me. And we see this with Paul in the ministry. Whenever you see God working, you'll see the adversary to God working also. 1 Corinthians 16:9, it says, "For a great and effectual door has been opened to me, and there are many adversaries." Paul was kind of the apostle to the Gentiles. He was kind of the one that brought it to the Gentiles. And he was saying that there's a great door, there's a huge door of ministry, but there are many adversaries. Paul suffered those adversaries. And if we're going to do anything for God in our time, in our culture, guess what? There's going to be adversaries. There's going to be trouble. And so we see that in, so somebody like to read, go ahead and read chapter 4, 1 through 3. We'll get started on this today. Ezra 4, 1 through 3.
Now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the children of the captivity builded the temple unto the Lord God of Israel, then they came to Zerubbabel and to the chief of the fathers and said unto them, Let us build with you, for we seek your God as ye do, and we do sacrifice unto him since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Azur, which brought us up hither. But Zerubbabel and Jeshua and the rest of the chief of the fathers of Israel said unto them, Ye have nothing to do with us to build a house unto our God, but we ourselves together will build unto the Lord God of Israel, as King Cyrus the king of Persia hath commanded us.
So you look at that and say, listen, these people came up and said, listen, we're willing to help you build this. I mean, free labor. I mean, how could you turn down free labor? Well, historically, they knew that they were not serious. They didn't really want to help. The best way to infiltrate this and to prevent this from actually being done is to volunteer to be helpers, right? And we can see that these are the Samaritans, right? And so historically, they had some issues between the Jews and the Samaritans. And if we look at, we can look at in verse in 2 Kings. Let's turn to 2 Kings just for fun, and we'll see what these 2 Kings 17, and I'll go ahead and read it starting at 24 to 32. It says, Then the king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Carthage, Ava, Hamath, and from someplace, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel. And they took possession of Samaria and dwelt in the city. And so it was at the beginning of their dwelling there that they did not fear the Lord. Therefore the Lord sent lions among them, which killed some of them. So they spoke to the king of Assyria and say, The nations whom you have removed and placed in the city of Samaria do not know the rituals of the God of the land. Therefore he has sent lions among them, and indeed they are killing them because they do not know the rituals of the God of the land. Then the king of Assyria commanded, saying, Send there one of the priests whom you brought out there, and let him go and dwell and teach them the rituals of the God of the land. So in this time, they kind of thought that, well, let's see, it'd be like, well, Orangeville would have its own god, its own deity. So all these little cities had their own deities that they worshipped. And so they just assumed, said, well, listen, we're in this, we don't know the God of the Jews, and so send down a priest because, obviously the lions are killing us. And so they attributed that to God. How they knew that was God doing that, I don't know. But anyway, they said that because they thought the deities were local. However, every nation continued to make gods on the little g gods, and put them in the houses of the high places which the Samaritans had made, every nation in the cities where they dwelled. The men of Babylon made sackcloth, and the men of Cuth made negro, and the men of, so you get the impression they're all making their own little gods. Verse 32, so they feared the Lord, and from every class they appointed themselves priests of the high places and sacrificed for them in the shrines. they didn't really worship God. They just said, we got to appease God. We're going to worship all these gods. And they didn't really even put the God of the Jews very high, right? I mean, they just did it as a form. And so these are the same people that have come to them in Ezra and said, listen, we want to help build to your God. It wasn't a matter of we want to help build a temple to our God. They never accepted the Lord, God of the Jews as their God. They said, we want to help you. Well, no, they didn't. They didn't really want to help them, And so, as you see in Kings, and the thing is that these leaders knew the history. So they knew who these people were and knew they were not serious. So basically, lip service only to God, and basically to hinder the rebuilding of the temple. In verse 4:3, what was the short answer? Nope, not helping us. You have no part in our building a temple to our God, no part. And I think sometimes today, I think there are good things that we do in our society, in our culture, that say, we want to come alongside and help you. Most of them, no, they don't. They do not, they don't know they don't know our God. They don't worship the true God. And I think part of the problem in our welfare system today is because the churches gave up the position of that. And so we have people that just they need food. Well, we just give them food. No, the problem with these people is, see, the reality is that most of the issues in our culture are spiritually based. I mean, they're based because we like to be our own God, basically. And so the state cannot address that. They can't say, listen, your problem is not that you're homeless. Your problem is the drug addiction. Your problem is the sin in your life. They can't say that. They just hand them money. And so consequently, whenever you have government taking over the welfare system, the people, it never works out well because they never address the heart issue. They have no basis of reference for the heart issue. So I think it's interesting to me that you don't see the atheists aren't building hospitals, are they? It's always the Methodists and the Catholics and the Baptists. It's those who value human life and are trying to do good. Those are the ones building hospitals. The atheists don't build hospitals. They don't care. The atheists will build Planned Parenthood facilities. And Planned Parenthood say, oh, we provide, no, they don't provide mammograms, pap smears. They don't provide any of that stuff. They only provide abortion. If you study the history of the Planned Parenthood, you'll find out that the Mrs. Is it Margaret Sanger was the head of it. Started it in the 30s. Hitler used a bunch of her documentation to justify the killing of the Jews. And her justification was the mongrel races, i.e. the black and the Hispanic, and those races were repopulating much quicker. So she sought to reduce that. That was the thrust of the Planned Parenthood. And I think it's just money today. So somehow we're much better than the Nazis, they just killed them, and so now we just we remove these people from the feed from the uterus and just sell the parts off to pharmaceutical companies. Terrible. I mean, God would judge us. So we see the answer: nope, you're not helping us build the temple. So we see we can move to verse 6 and 7, and I'll read that. It says, now, in the reign of Ahasuerus, note Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, they wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. So, Ahasuerus is basically the first of the Persian kings. Verse 7, in the days of Artaxerxes, now Artaxerxes is the son of Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus is in the Greek is Xerxes, so Artaxerxes is the son of Ahasuerus or Xerxes. In the days of Artaxerxes, Also, Bishlam, Mithith, and Trebeth, and the rest of their companions wrote to Artaxerxes, king of Persia, and the letter was written in Aramaic script and translated in Aramaic languages. So you've got two between verse 6 and 7 is approximately 50 years. So that's what makes this book difficult to read. And some of this, the history we know from Scripture, but we also know the history from Josephus, who was a Jewish historian. And we have other extra biblical information. So this isn't just, we didn't just pull this out of the air, how much time is spawned in here, but there's a fair amount of time. So the first letter was written, there's not recorded anything that happened or transpired because of that. In other words, we don't see anything happening. But the second letter was sent to the son of Ahasuerus. And yeah, where am I reading?
Yeah, where?
Ezra 4. Well, that'll make more sense if you're on the same page. So we see that the first letter, between that and Artaxerxes, when they write this letter to him, there's 50 years. There's a whole bunch of stuff happens in there, a whole bunch of history. And that's part of the reason I gave you that sheet, was so that you can see where some of that lies. Because it is a little confusing. But anyway, so the active resistance in verse 4 and 5. Let's read 4 and 5. It says, this was after they said, we don't want your help, okay, the Samaritans. It says, then the people of the land tried to discourage the people of Judah. They troubled them in the building and hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, the king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. So it said they basically hired counselors. I mean, today, how would you frustrate, say I want to build a new church, and so how would you frustrate that by hiring counselors today? How would you, I mean, this really talks about an active kind of a thing, kind of an active threat, kind of they threaten the workers and things. But I think today, because, well, you can't build there, you know, we dug up a couple Indian arrowheads, so it's probably a native land. So we need the Department of Culture and stuff to come in and make sure that that's not an Indian burial. That can be years, right? We want an EPA, we want an environmental impact study. Lots of money, I mean, lots of time. But anyway, these are the kind of things I think they did then also. They made it very difficult to work on this temple. They made it on the foundation. They made it hard for them in a myriad of ways. I'm sure, you know, buying supplies and stuff. You want to build a temple? Okay, well, the price just went up. I mean, who knows all the different ways that can happen. The same thing that happens today. If you want to do a good work, and if people are opposed to it, I mean, there's lawyers and courts and just a myriad of ways to frustrate that. And I think that's exactly what happened here. They frustrated the step. So the next thing is to write letters. So we're going to write letters. Well, today, you know, you can make any kind of accusation you want, write it in a letter, and everybody kind of believes that, right? It takes a long time. Like I said, the first letter in verse 6, we don't see anything about that. In other words, that's kind of dropped. But the second letter says, in the days of Artaxerxes, and it's interesting that this talks about the fact that there was a scribe and what do they call that? A counselor and a scribe. It's in verse 9. No, it says verse 8. Rehum, the commander, and Shimshai, the scribe, wrote a letter against Jerusalem to King Artaxerxes in this fashion. Basically, they wrote it. It was probably written in Aramaic. King Artaxerxes didn't read Aramaic, so it had to be translated into Persian. And he might not even been able to read. They probably read it to him. And so that's kind of an interesting the process. So he's kind of getting it almost second-hand or third-hand. And it says this, it says, in the rest of the nations, well, verse 10, it says, and the rest of the nations whom the great and noble, oceanapper. I like that, kind of an oceanapper. But he was actually one of the Persian. His name was Artaxerxes too. He was probably the first Artaxerxes. But the oceanapper took captive and settled in the cities of Smyrna and the rest of the regions beyond the river and so forth. Now why in the word and letter would you write and so forth? But anyway, this is a copy of the letter that they sent to him. To King Artaxerxes, from your servants, the men of the region beyond the river, and so forth. Well, beyond the region and so forth? Okay. Let it be known to the king that the Jews who came up from you have come to us at Jerusalem and are building a rebellious and evil city and are finishing its walls and repairing the foundations. Let it be known to the king that if this city is built with the walls complete, they will not pay tax, tribute, or custom, and the king's treasury will be diminished. Now, because we receive strong support for the palace, it is not proper for us to see the king's dishonor. Therefore, we have sent and informed the king that search may be made in the books of the records of your fathers, and you will find in the books of the records and know that this city is a rebellious city, harmful to kings and provinces, and that they have incited sedition within the city in former times, for which cause this city was destroyed. We inform the king that if this city is rebuilt and its walls are complete, the result will be that you will have no dominion over the region beyond the river. I mean, are you reading some of the things in there? I mean, it's the accusations being made against the Jews. It says, so let me know to the king that those who come, they're building a rebellious and evil city. They're rebuilding an evil city, king. And you know what? Finish its walls and repairing foundations. Let it be known to you that king, if this city is built and is also, they will not pay tax, tribute, or custom, as the king's treasury will be diminished. King, this is going to cost you money. Now, back in this era and things, when kings would take over an area, they would collect all the silver and gold coins, and they would bring them into the treasury. The money never went back to the city, right? They just collected it, they'd melt it down into ingots of gold and silver and put it in their treasury. That was how they obtained wealth. So he's basically saying, you know what, if the Jews rebuild it, they're not going to pay your taxes. They're not going to pay you tribute. They're not going to pay your customs. They're not going to, listen, you're going to lose money if you do that. Of course, kings, they like money. That's how they fund wars and things, with money. It's interesting. They would take a coin and they would stamp over the image of the king of that region. And that's pretty much through even up into the late 1800s in this country and stuff. They would stamp it. They would mint money. Take copper, no, that's money. Well, okay. And so we see that's happening here. And they said, okay, it's going to cost you money. You're going to lose money in this outfit. It says, now, because we receive support from the palace. Now, if you look at that, the literal translation of that is, we eat the king's salt. Now, you think, well, that's kind of why? Well, back then they had a monopoly. Salt was extremely important in this time. The Egyptians and the Persians all controlled salt. There was a monopoly on salt. It used to be, there's many parts of the world, a pound of salt was worth more than a pound of gold, because gold is just nice and shiny and all that other stuff. Well, salt is required for life. If you want to preserve food, it was an absolute necessity in the olden days. Salt was, if you read some of the pioneers going west and stuff, they take salted pork and, it was just salted hams and stuff. They would cure a ham, and you could keep that at room temperature for basically years, and it would still be okay. You had to wash the salt out before you could eat it, but salt was a critical item. In fact, if you go to Detroit, underneath Detroit, I didn't know if you knew this, but underneath Detroit is all salt mines. If you ever get an earthquake over there, I think the whole city of Detroit would drop about 8 or 10 foot. They've mined salt mines all underneath Detroit. There's a whole layer of salt under Detroit that they have mined. I don't think they mine it anymore, but they use it for storing things now. Grand Rapids has a gypsum mine underneath it. And it goes down, and there's a vein of gypsum that runs from Grand Rapids all the way down south, down into Kentucky and stuff, and that's where you get drywall from. But Rebecca's class went on a tour one time. They're just using it for storing because it's a constant humidity and temperature year round. But so, I mean, if you drive through Detroit, you wouldn't know that.
It's all been concreted. We haul tons and tons of concrete dumped down there.
Dumped down into the mines.
Yep, and they had these buggies that come and you'd shoot it full and they'd take off and spread it.
Where they just put it on the floors then, or? Well, wow.
It's all concrete underneath there now.
Wow, salt mines.
Back in the 60s, when that, I was working for ready mix.
Wow, there you go. Here's a guy that was making concrete for the salt mines in Detroit.
No, they were doing this in Grand Rapids.
Oh, doing Grand. Oh, for the gypsum mines. Yep. Yeah, they have elevators and tracks and everything down. I mean, it's pretty impressive. If you get a chance to tour it, it's well worth the tour. So basically, salt was a very important. These people were actually part of the people accusing the Jews were actually part of the palace. I mean, they were well connected. So they says, well, therefore, now, because we received support from the palace, it was not proper for us to see the king's dishonor. Therefore, we have sent and informed the king. You know, king, we're only concerned about you. I mean, this is, they call these, there's a term, we don't use it, a sycophant. That's one of the, a servile flatterer, I mean, leave it to Beaver. Wow, Mrs. Wow, that's a beautiful frock you have on today. I mean, Eddie Cleaver, I mean, it's just, I mean, if you remember that show, of course, some of you may be too young, but anyway, it's always a servile flatterer. Oh, king, we would never, because we're part of this, we didn't want to see you dishonored. That's the only reason we're undertaking this. That's the only reason that we're sending you this letter is because we're concerned about you. You're going to lose your money, right? And you're going to dishonor you. And then go down a little bit further and see what does it say. It says, go ahead and search the records. Well, how long do you think that would take to search the records? I mean, they didn't have computers. They had to send somebody to the library and dig this thing up, and then he had to have somebody research it and figure out what's going on. And the truth of the matter, there is some truth to that. A rebellious city, that was not completely inaccurate, but it wasn't to the point where they claim it to be. So they said, this all takes time. I mean, this is kind of the slow roll, the whole thing. I don't know if you have kids, if you tell them to go do something and they don't want to do it, they slow roll it, They just, go clean your room. Yeah, well, they moved one thing in that hour or something. I mean, they just, well, that's the same thing that happened trying to rebuild the temple. I mean, the workers, everybody around the area slow rolled it, They're just making sure it was difficult. So it says, of course, so that's why we sent to inform you, king, because we're concerned about your honor. Search the books, and you'll find in the book of records and know that this city is a rebellious city, harmful to kings and providences, and that they have incited sedition, which in the former times for which this cause the city is destroyed. We inform the king that if this city is rebuilt and its walls are complete, the result will be that you will have no dominion over that region beyond that. Oh man, now they're challenging. They're saying, hey, if they rebuild this city, basically you're not going to be king over this region anymore. And now these kings had a fair amount of ego, and man, that hit. They didn't like that. What do you mean I have no dominion over that? And these three names, it's another kind of interesting about this time period. It said the three names they had, the three guys, they had, in this time period, they had well-informed spy networks. I mean, they didn't have telephones or telegraphs, but they had people, they put spies in every city, so the kings would know what in the world was going on. Of course, now they just hook onto your phone and know what's going on in your house. But basically, back then, they had to send actual spies into the country. And so a lot of these guys they're talking about reporting directly to the king. In fact, I think it's in Kings, it talked about whatever you see and hear, write and tell me. I mean, this king was sending some spies into the country. I want you to know exactly what's going on. I want to see it. And it's interesting how this resistance to the work, right? I mean, a lot of the times the resistance is internal. So they slow rolled out, they caused fear among the people, and we see that all through Scripture, the same kind of thing. So let's go ahead and turn to Numbers 13. Wow, time is running out. Let's come to 13. I think we'll start. Let's start in 25. So basically, what we see is that says verse 17 says, Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, go up this way into the south and go up for the mountains and see what the land is like, whether the people who dwell there are strong or weak, few or many, or the land they dwell in is a good or bad, whether the cities they inhabit are like camps or strongholds, whether the land is rich or poor. So this was, Moses was, they had just come out of Egypt, right? They just seen a great delivery. God had just delivered them from the Egyptians as they crossed through the Red Sea. So Moses saying, I want you to go up. God's promised this land to us. Go up and check it out. I mean, that's like a good general, right? You need to go up and see what these cities are like. Because if it's a stronghold city, I mean, if it's a fortified city, that's a lot harder work than if it's just a camp. So basically the nation of Israel is now just a big, huge camp. It's several million strong, but it's a big camp. It says, verse 20, it says, and as they returned from spying out the land after 40 days, and they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron, all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Kadesh, and they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruits of the land. In other words, they brought back fruit to show you what kind of stuff was growing. And then they told him and said, we went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. They brought samples back. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anchan there. The Amalekites dwelled in the land in the south, the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses, said, let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. Wow. But the men who had gone up with them, we are not able to go up against it, for they are stronger than we are. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in are men of great stature. Therefore we saw the giants, and the descendants of Anchan came from the giants, and we are like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. So this is a pretty discouraging word. I mean, if you wanted to slow roll into the land of Canaan, this did it. But it is interesting. If we go to 14:9, this was kind of the response. Says verse 8, it says, if the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. And all the congregation said to stone them with stones. Now the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of the meeting before the children of Israel. And basically, if you read down through that, continue to read on that, God says, you know what, these people, I've had it with these people. Moses, stand aside. I'm going to make a great nation of you. I will destroy this people with pestilence. I'm going to destroy all these couple of million people. I'm going to destroy them. And Moses, I'm going to make you the new land, the new children of Israel from your lineage. And so Moses is a great example. He's a type of Christ. And so what does he say? He says, no, God, if you do that, what are the Egyptians going to think? That you brought all these people out here to kill them? No, he basically appealed to God in his sense of history and how God would appear to them. So Moses prevailed. It looks like Moses changed God's mind. I'm not really sure that's how it works, but Moses showed who he really was. He was concerned about God and about the people. He said, no, don't kill them, God. And of course, that starts there. There's some 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. Growing up, I always thought, well, they just didn't know where they were. No, they knew exactly where they were in the wilderness. It wasn't wandered only meant that they didn't put down roots and didn't have establishment. So Moses was quite the leader. And he basically said, no, God, don't do that. If you destroy them, this will get back to the Egyptians, and your name will be degraded. So what kind of charges do we see against the children of Israel? It's interesting. The king Ahasuerus, he says, one, it's an evil and rebellious city. That's a problem. Two, when done, they will not pay their taxes. King Ahasuerus, it's going to cost you money. And three, it will dishonor the king, and we don't want that. It says, go ahead and survey the history, see what you find. And sure enough, there was some truth to that. So what do we see in verse 17 through 24? Then the king sent an answer to the commander, and to the scribe, and to the rest of the companions who dwelled in Samaria, and to the rest in the regions beyond the river, peace, and so forth. That must be a standard. The letter which you sent to us has been clearly read before me, and I gave the commandment, and a search has been made, and it was found that this city is in former times has made insurrection against kings, and that rebellion and sedition have been fostered. There have been mighty kings over Jerusalem who have ruled over all the provinces beyond the river, and tax, tribute, and custom were paid to them. Now give the commandment to make those men cease, that this city may not be built until the command is given by me. Take heed now that you do not fail to do this. Why should damage increase to the hurt of the kings? So basically it works. He said, yeah, you know what? We looked at this and you're right. Tell them to stop. He said, we found out that they had kings there and they collected tax and tribute and money from the other provinces. So you're right, it's going to cost me money. Have them stop. And so, of course, look at the joy. It says, now when the copy of King Ahasuerus' letters were read before the scribe and their commanders, they went up to Jerusalem haste against the Jews, and by force of arms made them to cease. Now this wasn't just 5 or 10. This could have been 20, 30, 50,000 people that were working on this, right? I mean, it's quite a construction project. And it said they went up with arms. In other words, they went up and threatened them. He said, if you pick up that stone or that trowel or whatever, it's going to be a fight. And so, of course, what happens? They stop. The work stops. Thus, the work of the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem, ceased, and it was discontinued until the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. So it stopped for a long period of time. And so today, I think we see the same kind of issues today in our society and our culture. It doesn't take much. If just a few lawyers, this person complains, and the work of God can cease. So the choice here was, are we going to, for the builders, are we going to fear God? I mean, what in the world did they think, right? All of a sudden they were building, everything was happy. Yeah, there was some dissension among the people around them, but basically the work was progressing. So, did they think that, well, it's just God saying, not now? Because if we read a little further, basically, not only did the temple work stop, but basically they destroyed some of the work they had to rebuild some of the stuff they had already built. But like I said, between verse 6 and 7 is 50 years. It's hard. When you're reading this, it gets kind of confusing. So that's why I made you, there's a timeline. So sometimes I think as Christians, what causes us issues, I think, sometimes we think that being right is enough. Being right, right is might. I don't know how many of you remember the moral majority, right? The moral majority. One, it was never either. It was never a majority. It was never moral. So it was another political group. So we look around our culture today, our influence is not going to be on the national stage. It's going to be in our lives. It's going to be the discipleship issue, right? It's going to be How do we deal with our neighbors? How do we deal with our work? How do we deal with people at the store? I mean, how do we handle ourselves as Christians? So being right is not enough. I think we need to make sure that we are willing to be right for God and to be wrong in their eyes, to be hated. I'm not sure Christians are hated. Come on in. We better go ahead and next week read chapters 5:1 through 6:15. We're going to see the temple is going to resume the building. It's been some time, but they're going to finally get together and rebuild the temple. It's another king, by the way, another king. So let's go ahead and pray. Lord, I thank you for this day. I thank you for your word. I thank you for the histories and the lessons in history, Lord, that we can learn today and that we can rely upon you. God, all through your word, it always comes back to we can rely on our strength, which will fail us, or we can rely on you. And Lord, I just pray for our country. I pray that our leaders might turn to you, that they might acknowledge you, and they might come back to you. This I pray in the name of Christ. Amen.